It was a warm evening in July when I drove up to my parents' house for summer break. After 3 years of college, these visits had fallen into a predictable pattern: Mom's overenthusiastic hugs, Dad's awkward pats on the back, and endless questions about my studies that never quite masked their disinterest. "Maya, honey," Mom called from the porch. "You're just in time for dinner." And guess who's coming over? I didn't need to guess. Jennifer, my older sister, and her husband Tom had made it their habit to drop by whenever I was home. As if they needed to remind everyone of their success story. Sure enough, 2 hours later, we were all seated around the dining table. Mom had pulled out her special occasion tablecloth, the one with the delicate lace trim that only saw daylight when Jennifer visited. "So," Jennifer announced, setting down her fork with that theatrical flair she'd perfected over the years. "Tom and I have been thinking. We should all go to Hawaii for Christmas." Mom literally clapped her hands like an excited schoolgirl. "Oh, that would be wonderful." Dad beamed with pride. "What a fantastic idea, sweetheart." Then Jennifer turned to me, that familiar mocking smile playing on her lips. "Maya, do you think you can afford it? Or should Big Sister help you out?" I felt my cheeks burn but kept my voice steady. "I can manage my own expenses, thanks." "Are you sure?" Jennifer raised an eyebrow. "Because we're looking at about $3,000 per person for flights and hotel." I almost choked on my water. $3,000. That was more than all my savings combined, and I was only making minimum wage at my part-time jobs. But I'd rather eat ramen for the next 6 months than accept Jennifer's charity. "I said I'll manage," I repeated firmly. Jennifer shrugged and turned back to our parents. "Well, anyway, the restaurant is doing amazing. We just hired a new sous chef from Italy, can you believe it? Authentic Italian cuisine right here in our town." "You're so entrepreneurial, dear," Mom gushed. "Maya, you should really take notes from your sister about business sense." "Yes, Maya," Jennifer chimed in. "Maybe you could even work for me someday." Sitting at that dinner table, watching my parents fawn over Jennifer's Hawaii plans, I felt like I was 10 again. Nothing had changed. The same eager nods from Mom, the same proud smile on Dad's face, the same feeling of being invisible. Jennifer was still their golden child, just as she'd been since we were kids. 5 years between us might as well have been 50 for all the difference it made in how our parents saw us. They never said it outright, but their actions spoke volumes. Jennifer was the one they believed in, the one they were sure would make something of herself. "Hey, remember when Jennifer won the school business competition in 10th grade? Dad would often reminisce. We knew right then she had that entrepreneurial spirit. The funny thing is, they weren't cruel about it. They never deliberately hurt me or put me down. They just forgot I was there sometimes. Like I was a background character in the Jennifer show. They'd remember to ask about my grades or if I needed anything, but their eyes would always drift back to Jennifer, waiting for her next achievement to celebrate. Thank God for Grandpa Joe. He lived in that big old house, the one with the wraparound porch and the creaky swing. He was the only one who seemed to have enough love for both of us. A successful businessman himself, he'd promised early on to pay for both our college educations. When Jennifer left for college, I was 13 at the time, I thought things would change. Finally, I'd get my chance to be the daughter in the spotlight. Boy, was I wrong. Jennifer just called. Mom would burst into my room, practically vibrating with excitement. She's joined the debate team. We should drive up this weekend to see Jennifer, Dad would suggest at breakfast. We can take her some money for expenses. They'd spend hours on Skype with her, the laptop perched on the kitchen counter while they cooked dinner, Jennifer's voice filling our house even in her absence. Meanwhile, I'd slip out the back door and head to Grandpa's house. Those afternoons at Grandpa's became my sanctuary. We had our own little routine that felt more like home than my actual home ever did. We'd settle into his worn leather couch, a tub of mint chocolate chip ice cream between us, and watch old movies on his ancient TV. "You know what's great about Casablanca, Maya," he'd say, pausing the movie. It's not about the obvious hero. It's about the quiet one who does the right thing when nobody's watching. Other days, we'd order a pepperoni pizza and he'd tell me stories about his own childhood while we played chess. He taught me how to fish, too, taking me out on weekends to the lake behind his house. The thing about fishing, he'd say as he helped me bait my hook, is that the best fish aren't always the ones making the biggest splash. Sometimes it's the quiet ones, swimming deep, that turn out to be the most special. I'd sit there in his little fishing boat, watching the sunlight sparkle on the water, and feel like maybe, just maybe, I didn't need to be the favorite to be loved. Grandpa had a way of making me feel seen without making a big production out of it. Want to watch Roman Holiday again? He'd ask after a long day of fishing. I bought those chocolate cookies you like. Those moments weren't grand or flashy like Jennifer's achievements. They were quiet, simple, and real. While my parents were driving across state lines to deliver spending money to Jennifer, I was learning how to play poker with Grandpa using M&Ms as chips. 5 years passed in a blur of family dinners and achievements, all Jennifer's, of course. She graduated college with honors, landed a job at a prestigious firm, and started dating Tom, who my parents immediately declared was perfect for her. Meanwhile, I was preparing for my own college journey. The day I left for college, Grandpa hugged me tighter than he ever had before. His embrace felt different somehow, more urgent, more final. "I love you so much, Maya," he whispered in my ear. "Never forget that." I laughed it off at the time. "Grandpa, you're acting like we'll never see each other again." "I'll be home for Thanksgiving." He just smiled that gentle smile of his and patted my cheek. "Just remember what I said, kiddo." 2 months into my freshman year, Mom called. Her voice was breaking as she told me Grandpa had died in his sleep. The world stopped spinning for a moment. I sat there on my dorm room bed, phone pressed to my ear, unable to process the words. The funeral was on a crisp autumn day. After the service, we all gathered in Grandpa's attorney's office for the reading of the will. Jennifer sat primly in her designer black dress, while I fidgeted in the scratchy department store one I'd bought last minute. To my daughter Sarah, the attorney read, "I leave the sum of $50,000. Mom nodded, squeezing Dad's hand. To my granddaughter Jennifer, "I leave the sum of $300,000. Jennifer's face lit up. She immediately turned to Tom, who'd been hovering by her side throughout the funeral. "Baby, we can have that dream wedding now. And still have enough to start our restaurant." And to my granddaughter Maya, the attorney continued, "I leave my house on Maple Street, including all its contents and the surrounding property." The room went quiet for a moment before Jennifer burst out laughing. "Oh my God, Maya got the old house? That's hilarious." She wiped tears of mirth from her eyes. "Don't worry, sis, maybe you can sell it and buy yourself something nice. Though I doubt anyone would want that creaky old place." Jennifer, Mom scolded half-heartedly, but she was already smiling at her elder daughter's plans. "We'll have the wedding in spring," Jennifer announced, completely taking over the somber moment. "Tom and I already have the perfect business plan for an authentic Italian restaurant. This is exactly the capital we needed." True to her word, Jennifer threw herself into wedding planning. It was a spectacular affair: white doves, ice sculptures, a 5-tier cake, and what felt like half the town in attendance. I stood next to her in a bridesmaid dress she'd chosen, watching her marry Tom in what Mom called the social event of the season. Before the honeymoon tan had even faded, Jennifer and Tom opened their restaurant. They called it Bella Vita, Beautiful Life. The local paper did a feature on them, praising the young entrepreneurs for bringing authentic Italian cuisine to our small town. Mom and Dad framed the article and hung it in their living room. Meanwhile, I tried to figure out what to do with my inheritance. The property taxes weren't insignificant, and maintaining that big old house wouldn't be cheap. After running the numbers one weekend, I thought I'd found a solution. At the next family dinner, I decided to bring it up. "I've been thinking about the house," I said, trying to sound confident as I pushed my green beans around the plate. "Since I'm at college most of the year, I could rent it out. That would help cover the taxes and maintenance." The silence that followed made me look up. Mom and Jennifer were exchanging one of their looks, the kind that had always meant trouble for me growing up. Jennifer's husband Tom suddenly became very interested in his mashed potatoes. "Oh, honey," Mom said in that patronizing tone she reserved for when she thought I was being particularly dense. "Why would you want to rent to strangers when your sister and Tom need a place to live?" I blinked. "What?" Jennifer set down her wine glass with a delicate clink. "Well, it makes perfect sense, doesn't it? Tom and I could use the extra space, especially now that we're running the restaurant. And obviously, you're not going to charge rent from your own sister. I mean, that would be ridiculous." "Right, Mom?" "Of course it would," Mom agreed immediately. "Family helps family." And just like that, they turned back to their previous conversation about the restaurant's new wine list. Dad nodded along, Jennifer gestured animatedly about some expensive Chianti she'd imported, and Tom finally looked up from his potatoes to join in. I sat there, fork suspended halfway to my mouth, as the reality of what had just happened sank in. I could protest, of course. I could point out that it was my house, my inheritance, my decision. I could remind them that Jennifer and Tom had just gotten a huge sum of money from Grandpa's will, while I got, well, apparently nothing now. But I knew it wouldn't make any difference. They'd look at me with that mixture of disappointment and annoyance they always did when I didn't go along with their plans. Mom would sigh and remind me about family loyalty. Jennifer would make subtle jabs about my selfishness for weeks. Dad would give me that look, the one that said I was making things difficult for no good reason. So I did what I'd always done. I swallowed my protests along with my now cold green beans and stayed quiet. The next weekend, Jennifer and Tom moved into my house. She sent me pictures of how they were updating the place, Grandpa's old leather chair replaced by some modern monstrosity, his beloved fishing photos taken down to make room for framed reviews of their restaurant. While I studied for midterms in my cramped dorm room, my sister and her husband lived rent-free in my house. Every time I came home for breaks, I had to ask permission to visit what was legally my own property. Let's get back to the present. After that summer dinner, I threw myself into work with renewed determination. Between morning shifts at the campus cafe and evening hours at the study library, I barely had time to breathe. But every time I felt like giving up, I'd think about Hawaii and push myself to pick up an extra shift. When Jennifer called in late November, I had the money ready. $3,000, nearly every penny I'd earned over the past few months. "Send it today," she instructed. "I need to finalize the bookings." I transferred the money immediately, my hands shaking with excitement as I clicked send on the banking app. That weekend, I treated myself to a new swimsuit, nothing fancy, just a simple blue one-piece on sale. My friend Lisa let me borrow her good suitcase, the one with the wheels that actually worked. December 23rd arrived crisp and cold. I showed up at my parents' house with my borrowed suitcase and new swimsuit, practically buzzing with excitement. But something felt off. Mom barely met my eyes when she hugged me, and Dad kept clearing his throat the way he did when he was uncomfortable. Then Jennifer and Tom arrived. The moment they walked in, I knew something was wrong. Jennifer had that look on her face, the same one she'd worn when she told me she'd be living in my house rent-free. Mom and Jennifer exchanged glances that made my stomach twist. We sat down to dinner, and for a few minutes, there was only the sound of forks against plates. Then Jennifer set down her wine glass and cleared her throat. "We need to discuss something," she announced. "The restaurant, well, we've hit a rough patch. The numbers aren't what we projected." Mom reached over and squeezed her hand supportively. I noticed she already knew what was coming. "We've had to make some tough decisions," Jennifer continued, her voice dripping with fake regret. "We've had to cut some expenses, including our contribution to the Hawaii trip budget." My fork froze halfway to my mouth. "So," she went on, gesturing between herself, Tom, and our parents, "we've all discussed it, and we think the best solution is for Maya to sit this one out." The room started spinning. "But I already paid my share," I managed to say. Yes, well, Jennifer smiled that condescending smile I knew so well. That money will help cover the rest of our expenses. We couldn't possibly cancel on everyone, and Tom and I never even had a proper honeymoon because we went straight into the restaurant business. I looked at Mom and Dad, waiting for them to say something, to object to this insanity. But they just sat there, Mom still patting Jennifer's hand, Dad studying his plate as if it held the secrets of the universe. I paid my share, I said again, my voice shaking. $3,000. That was all my savings. Maya, Mom snapped, her tone sharp enough to make me flinch. Family helps family. Jennifer and Tom are going through a difficult time with the restaurant. The least you can do is be understanding. Understanding? I whispered. Yes, understanding. Besides, someone needs to watch the house while we're gone. Mom turned back to Jennifer. Now, about the hotel arrangements. I stood up so abruptly, my chair scraped against the floor. Nobody even looked up. I climbed the stairs to my old bedroom, the sounds of their cheerful conversation floating up behind me. They continued chatting and laughing as if they hadn't just stolen my money and crushed my dreams. Lying in my childhood bed that night, staring at the glow-in-the-dark stars Grandpa had helped me stick on the ceiling years ago, I made my decision. The next morning, I played my part perfectly. I stood on the front porch, smiling and waving as they loaded their luggage into 2 waiting taxis. Don't forget to water Mom's plants, Jennifer called out, adjusting her designer sunglasses. And check the mail every day, Mom added. Don't worry about a thing, I assured them, still smiling. Jennifer leaned out the taxi window. I'll send you lots of photos. You know, so you won't feel left out. She laughed as if she'd just made the funniest joke. I kept waving until both taxis disappeared around the corner. Then I walked straight to my car and drove to Grandpa's house, my house. Tom and Jennifer's belongings were everywhere. Her clothes filled the closets Grandpa's suits once occupied. Their pretentious art hung where his fishing photos used to be. Their wedding photos sat on the mantel where Grandpa kept our chess set. I started in the master bedroom, pulling out suitcases and boxes, methodically packing everything. Designer clothes, expensive shoes, Tom's custom-made suits, all of it went into boxes and bags. I found their important documents in Grandpa's old study and packed those too. The moving company charged me triple their usual rate for Christmas Eve service. My next stop was a 24-hour locksmith. He also charged a holiday premium, but I didn't care. I watched with satisfaction as he changed every lock in my house. I drove back to campus, arriving just as my friends were starting their Orphan Christmas celebration, our nickname for the holiday party we threw for students who couldn't or didn't want to go home. Maya, Lisa exclaimed when I walked in. I thought you'd be in Hawaii by now. Change of plans, I said, accepting the cup of hot chocolate she offered. But you know what? I think I'm exactly where I need to be. For a week, my phone buzzed constantly with Jennifer's updates from Hawaii. Each notification felt like a deliberate jab to the ribs. Living our best life, read the caption under a photo of Jennifer and Tom sipping cocktails on the beach. Making memories with the people who matter most accompanied a sunset dinner picture. My Instagram feed became a showcase of their perfect Hawaiian vacation. Jennifer lounging by infinity pools, Mom and Dad smiling at luau's, Tom trying to surf. Every photo was carefully filtered and captioned with nauseating platitudes about family time and much-needed breaks from running a business. The worst was her post about knowing when to step back from work and enjoy life. That one came with a photo of all of them holding champagne glasses at a New Year's Eve party, paid for with my savings. Then, early on New Year's Day, my phone exploded. Maya, why are all of Jennifer's things in our living room? Mom. Call me immediately. Dad. What the hell did you do with our stuff? Jennifer. The locks aren't working. Did you change them? Tom. I watched the messages roll in, my phone buzzing like an angry hornet. This is completely unacceptable. Call us now. Mom. If you don't bring the new keys right now, you'll regret this. Jennifer. Maya Elizabeth Parker, answer your phone this instant. Dad. The messages kept coming, growing increasingly angry. Words like ungrateful, selfish, and spiteful filled my screen. Jennifer's texts became particularly colorful, peppered with accusations about betraying family and ruining their lives. How dare you throw your own sister out on the street? After everything we've done for you? Mom. You're just jealous because we got to go to Hawaii and you didn't. Jennifer. This is the most selfish thing you've ever done, Dad. My phone showed 47 missed calls and over 100 messages by mid-morning. I read each one, letting their words wash over me without response. With each angry message, I felt lighter, freer. They could rage and threaten all they wanted, I wasn't that compliant little girl anymore. I put my phone on silent and went to get breakfast with my friends, leaving their messages unread and their calls unanswered. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel compelled to explain or justify myself to them. By evening, my phone showed over 200 missed calls. The constant buzzing had become white noise, but when Mom's name flashed across my screen for the 201st time, I finally answered. How dare you? Mom's voice exploded through the speaker before I could even say hello. Do you have any idea what you've put your sister through? Maya, Dad's voice joined in from another extension. This behavior is completely unacceptable. I sat cross-legged on my dorm room bed, surprisingly calm. Is it? Like taking my $3,000 and going to Hawaii without me was acceptable? That was different, Mom spluttered. The restaurant. No, I cut her off, my voice steady. Let me talk. For once in my life, just let me talk. Amazingly, they fell silent. You took my money I worked double shifts to earn. You let Jennifer and Tom live in my house rent-free while they ran their restaurant. You've always treated me like I was nothing compared to Jennifer. Always. That's not, Dad started. Remember my high school graduation? You left early because Jennifer called about a job interview. My college acceptance letter? You barely looked at it because Jennifer had just started dating Tom. Every achievement, every milestone in my life has been overshadowed by Jennifer's latest whatever. The words poured out of me, years of hurt and resentment finally finding their voice. And then Hawaii. You didn't just take my money, you laughed about it. Jennifer sent me mocking photos. Do you have any idea how that felt? To know my own family could be so cruel? The silence on the other end stretched out. Finally, Mom spoke, her voice softer, but still defensive. Maya, you have to understand. Jennifer and Tom are really struggling with the restaurant. They need help. And I needed parents who cared about me as much as they cared about Jennifer. I needed a sister who didn't treat me like a doormat. I needed a family who saw me as more than just Jennifer's backup plan. But where will they live? Mom's voice cracked. They can live with you, just like they are now. Or they can rent an apartment like normal adults. My house isn't their safety net anymore. And starting next month, I'm renting it out to actual paying tenants. You can't, Mom began. I can, and I will. I've already talked to a property management company. The lease is being drawn up. I hung up before they could respond. 30 minutes later, my phone lit up with messages from Jennifer. You vindictive witch, read the first one. You've ruined everything. I hope you're happy now that you've destroyed our lives. Each message was nastier than the last, a stream of vitriol that would have devastated me a year ago. Now, I just turned off my phone and went to sleep. That was a year ago. I'm in my senior year now, and I haven't spoken to any of them since. Through the family grapevine, I hear things. The restaurant finally went under completely. Jennifer and Tom are still living with our parents, supposedly regrouping before their next venture. Meanwhile, the property management company I hired found excellent tenants for Grandpa's house. The rent they pay covers taxes, with enough left over to build a decent savings account. I'm careful with the money. I think Grandpa would be proud of that. Sometimes, usually late at night when I can't sleep, I wonder if we'll ever reconcile. If Mom will ever understand why I did what I did. If Jennifer will ever see me as an equal rather than a convenience. If Dad will ever stand up for me the way he always stood up for her. But then I remember that day in Hawaii when they were all drinking champagne with my money, and I realized something: I don't need their understanding anymore. I don't need their approval or their love or their acceptance. What I need, what I finally have, is my self-respect.
I stared at the ornate mahogany casket, my eyes blurred by a constant stream of tears. The sea of mourners had long since departed, leaving me alone to say my final goodbye to Dad. The suffocating silence was shattered by Derek's voice. "So, how much are we getting from your old man?" I whipped around, eyes wide with disbelief. "What? His estate?" Derek pressed, no trace of sympathy in his tone. "The inheritance? How much will it be?" A lump formed in my throat as the weight of his callous words hit me. This was the man I'd married, the one who'd professed his undying love and support just months ago. Yet here he stood, mere hours after we'd laid Dad to rest, fixated solely on potential financial gain. I don't know the details," I stammered, still reeling from the emotional whiplash. Derek scoffed. "Well, you better find out. Your old man was loaded. We're entitled to our cut." Anger flared within me, a fire ignited by the stark contrast between the man before me and the one I thought I'd married. "My father just died, Derek? Show some respect." His eyes narrowed. "Don't get all sanctimonious on me. This is the real world, babe. Money talks." I opened my mouth to retort, but the words died on my lips. In that moment, it was as if the veil had been lifted, revealing the true nature of the man I'd vowed to spend my life with. The man whose ambition and greed clearly outweighed any love for me. Choking back tears, I stormed out of the room, Derek's voice trailing behind me. "We're not going to struggle like your parents did, Marlene. You hear me? This is our chance." His words echoed through the cavernous halls of the funeral home, a cruel reminder that the life I thought we had was nothing but an illusion. I couldn't shake the feeling of disillusionment as memories from happier times resurfaced, taunting me with the facade Derek had so expertly constructed. Our early years played like an idyllic montage, his hand gently resting on the small of my back as we strolled through the park, his warm smile as we dined by candlelight, his infectious laughter echoing through our modest apartment. In those days, money held little importance for us. Derek was content working as a high school English teacher, believing that impacting young minds was the noblest of callings. I poured my heart into the local nonprofit, inspired by Dad's philanthropic spirit. We lived simply, but our bond was rich with understanding and shared purpose. Perhaps that's what made Derek's descent into greed so insidious. The shift was gradual, like a malignant growth festering unnoticed. At first, the changes were subtle, a newfound fixation on designer labels, an inexplicable disdain for his once beloved profession, trivial indulgences that I naively overlooked, blinded by the idealistic notion that the man I loved remained unchanged at his core. Our first major clash came when Derek abruptly resigned from teaching without discussing it with me first. "This job is beneath me," he scoffed, tossing his school ID onto the kitchen counter. "I'm destined for greater things." I stared at him, bewildered. "But you always said teaching was your calling. What's going on, Derek?" He waved a dismissive hand. "I've outgrown that mindset, babe. It's time to aim higher, starting with finding a career worthy of my talents." In the days that followed, Derek's disdain for frugality became apparent. Date nights transformed into reservations at opulent restaurants where the wine list cost more than my monthly salary. Weekends once spent hiking or visiting museums gave way to conspicuous shopping excursions, our humble abode rapidly filling with designer furnishings and ostentatious art pieces. "You deserve the finer things in life," he'd insist whenever I questioned the extravagance, his words laced with a strange undercurrent of resentment. My pleas for restraint and open dialogue fell on deaf ears. Derek had been consumed by an insatiable hunger, one that steadily drove a wedge between us. The man I'd married, the one who found joy in simplicity and connection, was slipping further away with each materialistic indulgence. Derek's fixation with wealth and status only intensified as the months ticked by. Our once peaceful home became a battleground, with heated arguments erupting over his reckless spending habits. "This Rolex cost more than my entire year's salary," I shouted, waving the ostentatious timepiece in his face. We can't afford these kinds of luxuries, Derek. He scoffed, snatching the watch back. Don't be so provincial, Marlene. This is the lifestyle we deserve, the one your rich daddy enjoyed while looking down his nose at the rest of us. The bitterness in his tone struck me like a physical blow. My father worked hard for everything he built, I shot back, fighting the sting of tears, and he never flaunted his wealth like some arrogant buffoon. Derek's eyes narrowed dangerously. Well, now it's my turn. Our turn. We're not living like paupers anymore. Desperate to make him see reason, I tried a different tack. Don't you remember how happy we were when money wasn't a priority? We had everything we needed, each other, fulfilling work, a warm home. Had being the operative word, he sneered. I'm not settling for your hippie ideals and second-hand dregs anymore. Either get on board or get out of my way. The venom in his words left me reeling. This angry, materialistic stranger had fully consumed the man I once knew and loved. In the days that followed, the disintegration of our marriage accelerated at a dizzying pace. Derek grew more distant, his routine now centered around glad-handing with the city's elite and ingratiating himself with wealthy social circles. If I dared broach the subject of his wasteful spending, he'd brush me off with thinly veiled contempt. Don't worry your pretty little head about finances, dear, he purred in that mocking tone. Just leave it to me. It wasn't until Elena, my closest friend, pulled me aside one afternoon that I began to see the full extent of Derek's betrayal. Marlene, I have to tell you something, she said uneasily, her warm brown eyes filled with pity. Lowering her voice, she continued, I saw Derek having lunch with some woman last week, at that new high-end bistro downtown. My heart plummeted. What? Are you sure? Elena nodded solemnly. Honey, I'm so sorry. From the way they were interacting, it seemed like more than just a business meeting. Bile rose in my throat as her implication washed over me. Of course, in his endless pursuit of wealth and status, Derek's indifference towards me had given way to outright infidelity. The once solid foundation of our marriage had crumbled, reduced to rubble by his greed and wandering eye. Choking back tears, I met Elena's mournful gaze and forced out the words that had been weighing on me for far too long. I think I need to leave him. Despite my newfound resolve to leave Derek, extricating myself from the marriage proved easier said than done. Not only did his deceit and greed continue unabated, but his professional life began spiraling out of control as well. It started with the little things. Arriving home progressively later from work, absently scrolling through his phone during what few conversations we still had. When I finally mustered the courage to confront him, his excuse was always the same. Just trying to get ahead at the firm, babe. You know how it is. Except I didn't know. The Derek I'd married had loved his job teaching high school English, finding genuine fulfillment in fostering young minds. This obsessive, workaholic behavior was yet another glaring red flag that the man I vowed to spend my life with was long gone. The cracks in his professional facade became increasingly apparent over the following weeks. Meetings with supervisors held behind closed doors, urgent hushed phone calls, the vacant stare that often clouded his eyes, all signs that his career was hanging by a thread. One evening I returned home from the nonprofit to find Derek slumped on the couch, disheveled and reeking of stale liquor. You're home early, he slurred, not bothering to lift his head from where it lolled against the armrest. I bristled at his flippant tone. Derek, what's going on? You're worrying me. With a grunt, he hauled himself into a sitting position and fixed me with a bleary glare. What's going on is that I'm about to lose my job because the bigwigs don't appreciate my innovative strategies. He sneered the last words, making air quotes with his fingers. My brow furrowed. This was the first mention of any workplace issues. Why didn't you tell me? We could have discussed it, tried to. Discussing it isn't going to save my career, he snapped, cutting me off. Those elitist pencil pushers have had it out for me from day one. They're just intimidated by my potential. I opened my mouth, but he barreled onwards, working himself into an irate frenzy. Well, screw them. I don't need their pathetic six-figure gig. There are way bigger opportunities on the horizon, opportunities that'll make their bourgeois little heads spin. Unsure how to respond, I could only stare in stunned silence as Derek ranted and raved about corporate conspiracies and his bright future. His words may have been fueled by the hazy indignation of alcohol, but they hinted at the wounded pride and bitter resentment steadily poisoning his psyche. In that moment, it became clear. The stable career and comfortable life we'd built together no longer captivated Derek's ambitions. Our once modest dreams had been supplanted by a ravenous hunger for status, power, and wealth. Lots of wealth. The next afternoon, Elena called with another bombshell that obliterated any remaining illusions about my husband's integrity. "Marlene, you're not going to like this," she began uneasily. "But I saw Derek meeting with some woman again yesterday, at that park near downtown." My grip tightened on the phone as realization settled in like a leaden weight. "Let me guess. Not the kind of meeting you'd expect between coworkers?" There was a weighted pause before Elena exhaled slowly. "No, honey, definitely not." All at once, the pieces began clicking into place. Derek's frequent late nights, his newfound obsession with wealth and status, his indifference towards me, it all stemmed from another woman. Another life he was building, one untethered from the marriage vows he'd so carelessly discarded. My next words came out in a choked whisper. "He's been cheating on me, hasn't he?" Elena's pained silence was confirmation enough. In that moment, the floodgates shattered, a torrent of rage and betrayal crashing over me as I realized the true depths of my husband's selfish depravity. Through my sobs, I managed to choke out one final question. Does she have money?" Elena's response cleaved what little remained of my heart in two. "Yeah. From what I overheard, she's loaded." After Elena's revelation, a numb disbelief enveloped me for days. Part of me still clung to the desperate hope that Derek's indiscretions were just a momentary lapse, that the man I loved was still in there somewhere, buried beneath the avarice and betrayal. That flicker of naive optimism was extinguished one frigid evening when the evidence of his unfaithfulness slapped me squarely across the face. I had returned home late from a charity fundraiser, my body and spirit drained from putting on a brave face all night. Padding into the kitchen, I was surprised to find the lights on and Derek's laptop open on the counter. At first, I dismissed it as him simply forgetting to log off before leaving for wherever it was he disappeared to these days. But as I drew closer, something on the screen caught my eye, an unmistakable charge from a high-end jewelry boutique. My heart stuttered as I clicked to scrutinize the charge further. There it was in glaring digital font, a receipt for a diamond tennis bracelet totaling nearly $10,000. Ice flooded my veins as the sick realization dawned on me. This was no treat for his devoted wife. This was an extravagant gift, purchased with funds from our joint savings account, the one meant for our future and security. The one Derek had been steadily draining to bankroll his tawdry affair. White-hot anger lanced through me, mouth going dry as I heard the telltale jingle of keys at the front door. Derek sauntered in a moment later, seeming not to notice me at first. It wasn't until I cleared my throat loudly that his gaze snapped over, eyes widening fractionally. "Oh, hey, babe. Didn't expect you home, so. Who is she?" I cut him off, jaw clenched. He blinked dumbly. "Who's who?" "Don't play dumb," I snapped, snatching up the laptop and shoving the incriminating receipt in his face. "Who's the woman you've been spending our savings on?" Understanding dawned across Derek's features, swiftly morphing into a sneer. "So what if I got somebody a little gift? I've more than earned the right to spend my money how I see fit." My hand reflexively flew to my stinging cheek before I even registered the crack of his backhand. "Don't you dare talk down to me," he snarled, eyes glittering with contempt. "If it weren't for me, you'd still be a washed-up nobody slumming with the paupers." Shock and pain paralyzed me as Derek unleashed the full torrent of his vitriol. "Let's be honest here, Marlene. Our marriage was a mutually beneficial arrangement, nothing more. I played the doting husband while you dangled the carrot of your old man's fortune in front of me. Well, I'm sick of chasing scraps." He grabbed a fistful of my hair, wrenching my head back so our faces were inches apart. The acrid reek of bourbon and expensive cologne assailed my senses. "It's time you held up your end of the bargain. I want access to that trust fund, all of it. Because let's face facts. I'm the only adult in this relationship, the one with actual ambition and drive. Without me, you'd still be a pathetic little charity case living off Daddy's scraps. His words lacerated my soul, finally obliterating any remnants of the honorable man I thought I'd married. This cruel, domineering monster was the true Derek Hollister, a black-hearted conman who had masterfully played me for a fool using the oldest trick in the book. He released me with a disdainful shove, letting my body crumple limply to the floor as he stalked off, already dialing his phone. "Hey, baby, it's me," he purred. "Clear your evening. Daddy's about to come into some money." I kept my head bowed as Derek stormed back into the kitchen, his expensive loafers clicking menacingly on the tile. A tremor ran through me, every instinct screaming at me to flee, but I remained rooted to the spot, bracing myself for the inevitable confrontation. "Well," he sneered, grabbing a fistful of my hair and yanking my head back. "I'm waiting for an explanation, you ungrateful little—" "There is no inheritance," I interrupted, the words tumbling out in a breathless rush. "Not for you, at least." Derek's face contorted in an incredulous sneer. "What the hell are you talking about?" Steeling myself, I met his gaze unflinchingly. My father's assets and holdings were all locked into an irrevocable trust after his death. Yeah, in order for either of us to access a single cent, we both have to agree. Comprehension sank in, quickly followed by disbelief. You're lying. I'm not," I stated it simply, matter-of-factly. Those were the conditions he stipulated, a final test to judge the character of the person I chose as a husband. Derek opened his mouth, but I pressed on, determined to unleash the torrent of pent-up emotion that had been simmering all these years. "He knew, Derek. My father saw through your facade from the beginning. He recognized you for the materialistic, self-serving leech that you are." The words spilled forth like shrapnel, each one laced with a lifetime's worth of anger and disgust. "I was just a means to an end for you. A convenient pathway to the fortune you thought was your birthright. Well, let me enlighten you." My voice dropped to a seething hiss. "The only birthright you'll ever receive is a parade of sleepless nights, wondering how you could have been so blind to sacrifice everything for greed." A vein pulsed visibly in Derek's forehead as I issued the killing blow. "This marriage is over. Consider the settlement from my personal savings your reward for playing the part so convincingly. It's more than you deserve, but at least now you won't drag anyone else down with your pathetic existence." The resounding slap echoed through the cavernous kitchen like a gunshot. My head whipped to the side from the force of the blow, the sharp sting blossoming across my cheek as I crumpled to the floor. Derek towered over me, chest heaving with unbridled rage. You ungrateful, treacherous bitch," he roared, specks of spittle flying from his lips. "After all I sacrificed for you? For US?" With a feral snarl, he hauled me up by the collar of my blouse until our faces were mere inches apart. His next words dripped with venom. "You'll be the one wondering, Marlene. Wondering how you'll survive without a single penny to your trust fund name. Because I'll make sure every friend, every business associate knows exactly how low you stooped to try and rip me off." He shoved me away, my back slamming against the counter as I fought to remain upright. "This isn't over, not by a long shot. You hear me?" Chest heaving, eyes wild with fury, Derek snatched up his coat and stormed towards the front door, pausing only to lob one final parting shot. "Have fun with your precious charities, you pathetic do-gooder, because my dear, dear wife... That's all you'll have left when I'm through." The door slammed with deafening finality, leaving me huddled on the kitchen floor, cradling my throbbing face as the enormity of my situation washed over me. Derek's path of destruction was only just beginning, and whether I was prepared or not, I was squarely in the crosshairs. In the days following Derek's explosive departure, I found myself adrift, unmoored by the jarring reality that my life had become unrecognizable. The cozy home we'd built, the dreams we'd shared, all desecrated by one man's insatiable greed. My initial instinct was to withdraw, to lick my wounds and mourn the demise of my naively idealistic notions about love and partnership. But the more I dwelled on Derek's vicious threats, the more a simmering fury took root. He wanted to drag my name through the mud? To punish me for seeing through his charade? Well, two could play at that game. It started small at first. A carefully worded email to our property manager, ensuring Derek had no way to siphon further funds from our joint accounts. Another message to my assistant at the nonprofit, alerting her that I would need to take some personal time. Then came the bigger moves, executed with a calculated precision that would make even Derek's mercenary soul proud. First, I orchestrated a video call with Alina, filling her in on every lurid detail of Derek's betrayal and demanding she back my version of events, should he try any underhanded tactics. Her expression shifted from horror to grim resolution as I outlined my gambit. Next, I drafted the divorce papers, employing the shrewdest family law firm in the city to guarantee Derek received not a penny more than what I deemed fair restitution, a settlement payment of $200,000 from my personal trust, enough to ensure he could slink out of my life forever, but not so exorbitant that he could squander it indefinitely. Elena insisted on being present for the signing, watching with poorly concealed disdain as Derek scrawled his name with a trembling hand. "I hope you realize how lucky you are," she said, voice low and filled with quiet menace. "If it were up to me, you'd be leaving with nothing but the clothes on your back, you spineless gravy-trained." "Elena, it's done," I interjected firmly, as much for her benefit as to halt Derek's wounded sputtering. "He's gotten what he deserves. More than he deserves, even." The implication hung heavy in the air as the two of us stared him down, daring him to protest, to unload the inevitable torrent of vitriol I knew was simmering behind those smoldering eyes. But after an agonizing moment, Derek simply gathered up the papers and stormed towards the exit without a word. Just before disappearing through the door, he paused, turning to fix me with one final glower. "This won't be the last you hear from me, Marlene." It wasn't a threat, but a snarled promise, saturated with a bitterness so viscous it was nearly tangible. Then, like a noxious vapor dissipating in the breeze, he slipped out the door and was gone. It would be weeks before I heard from Derek again, the eerie silence only periodically shattered by news of him liquidating assets or reports of increasingly erratic public outbursts. A small, vindictive part of me relished every lurid detail, savoring his downward spiral into irrelevance. But I knew this temporary reprieve was precisely that, temporary. Sooner or later, Derek's rage and indignation would reach a crescendo, and when it did, I intended to be ready. Because while he'd been content to leech from others for sustenance, I was preparing to fight this battle the same way I'd built my entire life, through hard work, perseverance, and a steadfast refusal to let anyone or anything break me. Not even the man who had once sworn to cherish me, in sickness, health, and utter betrayal of every vow. The first whispers began trickling in a few weeks after Derek's unceremonious exit from my life. Snippets of information delivered by well-meaning friends and colleagues, each one more damning than the last. "Did you hear Derek got fired from his job? Apparently he was skimming funds for personal use. I ran into Derek downtown the other day. He was drunk, ranting about you and your dad's money like a man possessed. Derek's been blacklisted by every law firm in the city after that courtroom outburst. He's become a total pariah." At first, I shrugged off the gossip as idle chatter, gossamer threads of hearsay that held no true weight or substance. But as the reports persisted, it became impossible to ignore the harsh reality. Derek's unraveling was veering rapidly into total meltdown territory. It all came to a head during a garden party hosted by Elena to celebrate the launch of her new art gallery. I had been mingling amiably with potential donors when the first piercing shatters of glass shattered the refined ambiance. A chorus of startled gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd as Derek stumbled into view, wild-eyed and swaying perilously. "There she is," he bellowed, words slurred and reeking of cheap liquor. "The ungrateful harpy who destroyed everything." Elena's security team immediately moved to intervene, but he shrugged them off with drunken bravado. "Don't try and silence me," Derek raged, spittle flying from his chapped lips. "Everyone here deserves to know what kind of shrew they're dealing with." My cheeks flushed crimson as every eye turned towards me. Clearing my throat, I addressed the owner of the gallery in measured tones. "Please accept my apologies for this disruption. I'll handle." "She played me for a fool, every single one of you," Derek interrupted, his tirade rapidly crescendoing into unhinged raving. "All for the sake of money. Her money." There were audible gasps and shocked whispers. I fixed Derek with a steely glare. That's enough, Derek. You've embarrassed yourself enough for one evening. But he barreled onward, fueled by an endless wellspring of spite and injured pride. After everything I sacrificed for our future, she tried to steal my inheritance. Can you believe the audacity? The words barely registered before a harsh bark of laughter burst forth, unbidden. I couldn't contain the eruption of bitter mirth bubbling up inside me. Your inheritance? I echoed incredulously. Derek, you arrogant, pathetic fool. His jaw went slack, belatedly recognizing the potent mixture of pity and revulsion simmering behind my gaze. Don't you realize why this happened? Why you've ended up a disgraced, destitute laughingstock? My voice dropped to a hush, yet carried clearly across the garden. It's because you put your faith in money rather than the people who actually loved you. You traded ethics and integrity for greed, and now you have nothing. No wealth, no status, not even a shred of self-respect left. My denunciation hung heavy in the air, each word landing like a scathing slap. For one fleeting instant, Derek's bravado faltered. Then, like a rattlesnake rearing back, his expression contorted into one of pure, unhinged loathing. This isn't over, Marlene, he snarled, fists clenching. I'll make you regret ever. Get him out of here, Elena interjected coolly, having materialized at my side with her security detail in tow. Within seconds, Derek was being forcibly hauled away, his drunken imprecations fading into the distance as he was deposited unceremoniously on the sidewalk outside. As tranquility gradually returned to the garden, I felt a gentle pressure on my arm. Marlene, are you all right? Elena asked softly, brow creased in concern. I offered her a wan smile and patted her hand reassuringly. I'm fine. More than fine, really. My gaze drifted towards the path where Derek had been dragged, visualizing his once smug confidence withering beneath the harsh light of public shame and rejection. In that moment, I felt an overwhelming sense of freedom and release. The demise of my treacherous ex-husband was nearly complete, and from the ashes of betrayal, a new, more resilient woman was emerging.